We love vibe coding and using AI tools to create apps and games, but AI has its limits, and one of which is code limitations. So, the amount of code you can actually generate with AI, uh, depending on the platform or model you're using, is somewhere around 2,500, and that's something what we are trying to improve on Rosebud AI. So, we have a new tool for you. It's called Multifile and last time when we talked about really large projects, we did not have multi-file yet, and we suggested a way of creating different files that you can use as assets within your game. But now we have a way better solution for that, and we want to have a quick walkthrough how to use it, how to enable it, and see if there's anything else you might be interested in, and we can just add a little bit more to that discussion. This is Rosebud AI Live. It's here as usual with Jason. Hey, Jason.
Hey, everyone.
Jason is right now at the airport. He's flying back home. So apologies for any noise, but I think we should just jump straight into it.
Pretty much what Rosebud does right now for you is that when you're making a game or an app or whatever, Rosie will create different files over here in this code type here. This shows the code of your current project. She's going to create multiple files that basically take care of different things. So let's say you have a player, you play on your game, you have like, environment assets, you might have like a sky effect. She basically will separate the files in a way that makes sense from like a programmer perspective. And then what you can then do is that once she does that, you could then go into the code tab and start to click this purple icon here, this purple circle. And then what that does is that'll hide certain files from Rosie. And what that will do is that it basically make you no longer have to worry about that limit that Kier said about 2,500, because when you get to that size, you can just start to disable the files that Rosie doesn't need to worry about right now. Like the sky, let's say, if you're working on a player character, the sky might not be important to work on right now. You can just hide it, and that'll keep freeing up enough room for you to keep prompting, and you pretty much can avoid ever hitting the limit. So right now we have this civil flight sim. We have this plane, looks pretty good. I mean, zooming out a lot, but yeah. But if we go look in the code tab now, you can already see we have quite a few files. Rosie has decided to split. Okay, we have a game loop. Game loop is like basically how the game, what's running every single frame of the game. There's the code taking care of that. You put in the use game loop. The main is like what basically renders your project. What basically can think of it like the complete outer structure of the project. She's taking care of that here in main. HUD is the heads up display. That's like the UI you see over here. The flight simulator. This is probably code taking care of the actual plane flight and things like that. You have environment, controls, and then this is probably the code for the actual plane, the way it's structured, the way it looks. So that's already split into all these files here. So now, if we ever got to the limit and we wanted to then say, okay, I want to work on my aircraft, I want it to look better, but I reached the limit. I'm at 2,500 lines of code. Rosie can't respond anymore because of the limitation. I can just start disabling. I don't want to worry about controls right now. I don't want to worry about the HUD. I don't want to worry about environment. And I can now keep prompting now about focusing on my aircraft. And I'm not at the limit right now because maybe the aircraft is only like 300 lines. Now I have like 2,200 lines of code of space ready to go for me to keep prompting. So that's why the feature is so useful.
Okay, how do I create a new file, right? Is there any way I can tell Rosie like, hey, I'm working on this new feature and it needs a separate file, or what can be the approach?
Okay, so usually Rosie's gonna do it on her own. Like she'll know when it makes sense to make a new file. So usually you don't have to tell her. But if you, for example, let's say there's something specific that you want to be in its own direct file. Like, let's say you want it to be that your game has levels and each level is in its own file. You can tell her that, like, hey, can you use an approach where each level is one file? Then she'll do that. So she'll make level 1.jsx or .js, and then she'll do that. Yeah. So if you have some like, hey, your game is split into pieces like that are levels, or that let's say you're making a game that has like a bunch of vehicles, and that each vehicle is going to be very complicated, but each one's going to be separate. You might want to make like a vehicle1.js, vehicle2.js, etc. But yeah, usually Rosie's going to take care of that on her own.
When you have a lot of files, how to select the files that are enough for AI to know how to add new features? Because I know at some point it might be, if you're selecting some level information, but there's no information about the game mechanic, how AI is going to know. So how to make sure you select the right files. So there's like the context is enough for AI to actually implement the features correctly.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's probably the hardest. That's one of the biggest difficulties with the feature, even though the feature is very useful right now already. What the best thing I could recommend is that you kind of start to ask Rosie, hey, which files which files do you need to change to work on this thing? Let's say you have a player character, but you don't know exactly which files are needed for you to continue working on the player. You could just ask Rosie, that, hey, which files do we need to work on which files do we need to modify to work on the player? Then Rosie will tell you, and then you could then just disable anything she doesn't mention. Some Rosebud creators get a little bit comfortable looking at code, so they can kind of look in the code and see, oh, I see player mentioned, but you don't have to go that far. You can just ask Rosie to tell you, hey, which files are important for us to see or to be able to see, to work on, or to be able to modify, to change the character, to change this or that, and Rosie can guide on that.
I see. Is there any way to split some files into separate files? Again, telling Rosie like, "Hey, it seems like this file is about to hit a limit. Can you separate it?" Or this is also tricky.
Yes, Rosie can definitely do that. In fact, it's actually a really good idea to do that because even with this nice approach of Rosie splitting things into files, what can happen sometimes that Rosie will still make one particular file. Like let's say you have like one big system file that takes care of a lot of different systems in your game. That might end up actually getting to the limit, 2,500 lines itself. So now you have one file that's 2,500, and you still end up hitting the limit anyway. So in that case, you definitely want to be like, hey, let's say our system.js file is like almost like the limit, or it's too big. How can we split it so that it's not this big? And then she can take care of that. You probably will have a few errors as she's doing that process, because taking apart a core system like that is going to be tough to do without having some errors along the way. But she should be able to, after a few prompts and a few fixes, get it split that file into pieces, and you can then avoid hitting the limit in that one file. But yeah,
Okay.
that's very important. Yeah, to keep an eye on.
What do you think is the reasonable size in terms of lines of code for a file?
Mm.
So you have like a little room and not hitting limits. Is it like 1,000? And again, it's probably like very kind of dependent on what you prefer and like your coding
Yes.
style. But maybe you have some suggestions.
Yeah. All
Well,
right. It's
that's an interesting airplane right
yeah.
now. Wow.
15 Twitter. Yeah. So to answer the question, that is like, it kind of does change depending on what it is. For like,
Hmm.
you might have like your HUD, or like your UI on screen might actually just be like 500, 300, maybe even 200 lines of code. That would be tiny. Whereas your game system might need to be like 1,500. So it depends. I would say that kind of, don't be worried if like your big systems in your game are like taking up like 1,500. But when it starts getting towards 2,000, you might want to start taking a look at splitting it, because there's by that point there's an obvious way to split it, and
Hmm.
also you don't want to hit the limit. It's going to be very tough to, once you hit the limit, to actually split it after that, because Rosie won't be able to actually respond if you hit the limit. So yeah, but don't be like, there's not one size fits all size for each um,
Hmm.
like file, but you definitely want it to be that the system files can be bigger, and then just some other stuff that's obviously should be smaller, and that's fine. Just don't want to go too close to like 2,000 and above.
Okay, I see.
Yeah,
So ideally, to sometimes just go into the code tab and check like, hey, how big are my files, and then
yeah,
just go ahead and
yeah.
try to manage that and maybe split some files or ask Rosie to split some files, or be cautious when you adding new features and just ask to create new files for new features. Do we by default now just create new files for new features, or it also kind of depends and doesn't happen all the time, or like no new features, new parts of the game? I think Rosie is now instructed to create new files for new things, or what's the current system?
Yeah, no, Rosie will often, when there's a new feature, she'll often create new files on her own. But if the new features tie in with old systems already, like in a way that's very obvious, she may not make a new file, and that's okay. But again, if your files start to get so big that it's like getting towards the limit, then Rosie, almost always at that point, Rosie herself will know how to split it in a way that makes sense. So all you have to just let her know that you want it to happen now. Hey, that okay, this file is getting too big. Why don't we split it into pieces? And she'd be like, oh yeah, okay, we can actually put that new feature, a new file. There's actually like two other features in that file we should also move out, and she'll take care of it. Yeah, you usually don't even need to tell her what to split out, or what to split, or what to remove. from that big file, she'll know. But sometimes she just may not do it on her own because she feels like the systems are connected, and she may not necessarily like have a good understanding of like when she's getting towards 2,500 or 2,000 runs.
Makes sense. Yeah. So Rosie doesn't know of her own limits, which is kind of
Yes,
funny.
she has a rough
She,
idea, but not a good, strong idea or like clear idea.
yeah. So I know that a lot of people kind of like there's a pitfall where people create a project in single file, and
Mm.
then they hit the limit and they're like, "Oh my God, I didn't know about multifile. How can I make my project multifile?" And what do you have to say for that? Because I think there's two kind of parts of the question. So first of all, how to avoid creating single file projects? Because I
Yeah.
think now, like, there's still ways to create single file projects, so
Oh
not
yeah.
everything is multi-file. And then second, if there's any way to convert your single file project into multi-file. Let's
Mm.
start with one, I guess, and just show how do you create multi-file.
Sure. Okay, so going back to the homepage. To create a multi-file project, right now the ways to do it. I mean, there'll be probably some. We're going to be making it even like we're going to be making multi-file be the main approach in even like across the board soon. There's still like Kier said, some ways you can still end up in a single file, which definitely has a worse experience. But this prompt bar here, if you prompt for a game that's a 3D game, or if you prompt for an app, although just a heads up, the way to create apps will be changing soon. This prompt bar is going to be for only 3D games soon. But anyway, this prompt bar here, if you're making a 3D game, it's going to be multi-file right off the bat. If you make a 2D game though through this prompt bar, which again is going to be moved to different spots soon, but right now, this very moment, if you do that, it will be a single file. So if you want to avoid that, we have a template that we can link from Akashi, actually one of our power users. It's a it is a phaser multi-file project. Yep. So we can you can use that one. Yeah, or you would have to make a 3D game. So yes, if you remix a 2D game from like this list here, like a phaser 2D game, like let's say if you remixed Match Three or I'm not sure about Match Three, but Air Hockey Yo or Mr. Elastic, which is not really so, but yeah, games like that in Linister's Legacy, what would happen is that you'd be in single file, and then that will lead to some problems if you're trying to use multi-file. Those projects will just be single file. You can't actually get into multi-file. The only way to get those to multi-file would then to be to port it over, which is what Kira mentioned about how you go from single file to multi-file. What you'd have to do then is you need to create a new multi-file project. The best way probably be remixing multi-file beta over here, and then you need to start copying over chunks of your code into the chat of your multi-file project so that Rosie can start to like piece by piece rebuild your single file project up in a multi-file setup, which is
Hmm.
it can be error prone and tedious. That's why we don't recommend it. We recommend just starting in multi-file.
Yeah, so by just to recap, if you want to create a multi file project, basically use the prompt on top, prompt bar, or remix the multi file template
Yeah,
that's a
yes,
little bit below.
yes, but not for 2D or apps. There is like yeah, right now if you do 2D, it's going to be single file on the prompt bar.
Okay, yeah, so
Yeah,
2D is an exception.
yeah,
And but we mostly talk about making games, so it should be
yes,
applicable for most people. So
3D
yeah,
games. Yeah.
if you don't want to start with the prompt bar, you can go into a multi-file beta template in a left side of JSON screen, and
Yeah.
yeah, you can just tap remix. So yeah, let's actually just click remix, and you're gonna see a blank project with multi-file support. You're gonna see a couple of files that already exist in there, right? So do
Mhm.
these matter? Do you like why do we have that setup, or kind of maybe quick explanation?
Sure. Well, they're just some basic setup that will take care of a lot of issues that you'll have if you try and just do it from in a blank project. They basically are right. They're basically kind of telling Rosie that this is the structure we're starting with. You don't want it to, if you mess around with main.js, what can happen is that Rosie may not actually render the game properly at all. Like just right now, the game's running. Think of the game running in a container. Sorry, my bad. In a container, and then she needs to put all the stuff to run in that container, and she might not know how to structure the container if you delete this code here. So that's why it's important. 3Scene is setting up like some basic 3D stuff. Basically, it's like a very basic 3D setup to just kind of make it clear that 3D is going to be might be used in this game or in this app. The Chat AI class is it's actually a very cool feature that basically allows Rosie to add AI powered stuff to your game without any pretty much like one prompt. You don't have to even touch this at all. But let's say if I use a prompt like, "Hey, make it that in this game enemies have random names," then she can use AI to do this to generate actually names right as she's playing the game that are made with AI, things like that. And also, app.js is basically similar to main.js. It's basically just the structure of your game and making it run properly. Yeah, you
Nice.
don't have to think about these that much, but I won't recommend asking her to remove these. They're very small anyway, so you don't have to. They're not going to help to save space if you remove them.
Okay, so yeah, better to like keep them as is.
Yeah,
So the last part you mentioned that if you have a single file project that's a large project, it's
yeah.
usually just one single file called main.js, right? And
Oh yeah.
why can't you just copy everything from main.js to main.js of the multifile and just save it? So is it going to help or it's not going to work?
Yeah.
Why this like simple kind of like approach can't work?
Yeah, that actually can work. But the thing is, almost everybody who wants to do that actually is already at the limit, and at that point, yeah, that's still going to be very hard. If your project is early, then yeah, honestly, that could actually work, especially if you're really early. Like you just made like, hey, I made a level and my game's at like 800 lines. Yeah, honestly, like you can do just paste it into the chat, and then Rosie, there will be some errors, but Rosie should be able to get it running. Although to be fair, yeah, like what I'm saying actually might be a bit misleading because the multi-file project does not have phaser running. That's actually the hardest part, way more
Mm,
than errors from Rosie. It's that phaser is not actually there, so you would actually have to. That's why I recommend using Cache's phaser template instead of the multi-file beta template if you want to do that porting from a phaser game specifically. But yeah, because what will happen is that Rosie can be like, oh yeah, sure, let's port it, but actually we don't have phaser yet, so we need to load phaser, and then getting phaser loaded properly on your own is like very complicated. It's not easy. That's why Kashi's template is good because Kashi just did all the work himself, and then now you can just start right from that.
And you can
But
probably
yeah,
find it in the community templates tab. So if you go up right and click community templates, so I
is it there?
assume the template must be there, right?
Actually, no, I don't. Might actually not be. That's a good idea. We should put
Wow.
it.
Okay, yeah, we should definitely add it. Cache, huge thumbs up. But yeah, if you look up for phaser, and then it should
um,
be
there it is. Yeah.
tower defense template.
Multi-file basic
Multi-file
phaser.
phaser. Wow. Yeah. So just basic phaser. If you probably look up for basic phaser, you're gonna find it.
Yeah, basic
Um,
phaser. Yeah.
Wait, so you mentioned that if you have a big single file project, you can also just feed the code in chunks to Rosie, right? And ask
Yeah.
her to implement things. But how do I pick chunks, right? Like if I
Yeah.
just have a huge project, what do I know, right? And especially if someone who's using Rosebud probably not that familiar with coding and like 3JS or whatever. What do you even copy and send to Rosie?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, that right there is another reason. I'm sorry for the noise, but there is another reason why we strongly recommend not starting with the regular phaser project and trying to do this process. Because this part right here pretty much requires you to look in the code, honestly. But basically, what you have to do is you basically need to look in the code and say, okay, hopefully Rosie is actually structuring my project properly. I can see from like line. Maybe I should find an example project. Honestly, even this is Nonistus Legacy. Um, okay, so if I look over here, this product is very well structured. So, so hopefully yours is too when you're doing this process. But this, you can see that there's a gladiator class here. Gladiator is just like classes. Think of it like a type of object in your game. There's a gladiator here. So what you could do is you can just scroll all the way to the end of the gladiator section of the code, which ends here. You can see like the line that goes all the way up here. This is the gladiator section. You can see if you click this arrow here, it drops down the full code of the gladiator. I could just highlight the entire thing.
I
And when
see.
I highlight the entire thing here, this, I could then go in my project and say, hey, I am porting my Phaser game to this multi file structure. Here is my gladiator. And then I can just paste like this. And Rosie will
Mhm.
then add the gladiator to, yeah, ideally at this time, if you already you probably shouldn't paste the Gladiator first. You probably should paste like your actual main game systems first, like Combat Manager. That's a good one because that's like you could tell it's like a system in your game. Those ones are more important to get over. UI Manager, you want that one over there. But yeah, those like you have to basically find these kind of. Also, you look for this teal or I don't know, turquoise text. That's what you should look for the most, honestly. But anyway,
Mm,
just you want to find these like, separate pieces. Like this is a Gladiator piece. This is the UI Manager piece. I keep pasting these pieces in the chat, and Rosie will just keep adding them to different files in your multi-file. That's pretty much
okay.
the process. It's not again. It's gonna have errors. It's gonna be tough, but it is possible if you must do. Like if it's already too late, you already made a single file project. You need to move to multi-file. That's the best way to do it. But again, strongly urging everyone to start with that multi-file basic chaser.
Okay, maybe a last question and something I haven't tried myself, but do you think there is a chance if you go to like ChatGPT and use some advanced models like O1 and just like give them all 3,000 lines of code of your game and say like, hey, can you please split this into files? But then I
Yeah.
guess you have to also explain the structure we have for multi-file on
Yes.
Rosebud, and that's where it's also hard. So there's no like simple solution, right?
Yeah, well, but actually, if you do have like you're on a paid tier of some advanced model, that actually is a bit easier than what I said. What you want to do is you want to basically, like Kier just said, you need to go over to the. Let's go back to the original version. You want to go over here to app.js, paste that into the chat of the model, and say this is app.js. In that same prompt, say game.js is this, game2.js is this, main.js is this. And then after you've done that, you can the model now has that in its context. You can now say, here is my single file game. I need it to work in my multi-file project. And then now that the AI model has a reference to these your current version of your project, which is these four, that model would then be like, okay, here are the files you need to have. You need to have this file, this file, this file, this file, and then the model and then you can just paste those into back into Rosebud. But yeah, after that, yeah, which is easier than what there'll still be some errors, but the AI model would most likely, as long as you actually paste those examples of the file structure that you need to have, the it should be relatively good response that should go pretty quickly.
All right. Well, I think these are all the main things that exist to discuss about multifile. Please leave your comments if you have more questions. Anything we you think we should just discuss separately. But technically, with this multifile feature, there's no limits to how much code or how many files, how big can be your game. So just use it wisely. Don't hit the limit in any of the files. Try to always separate different features and parts of the game into meaningful chunks. And yeah, I'm wishing you all happy coding, and
Yep.
we'll try to help you out as much as possible. Just as a reminder, we stream every Monday and Thursday, and you can also join us on Discord just to hang out together. We're probably going to jump right after I finish the stream. So yeah, please let us know what you think, and we are hopeful that you're going to be able to utilize this feature and create amazing games. Thank you,
Indeed.
Jason, once again, and bye, everyone.
No problem. See everyone.